welcome to the Poised Investor Podcast. My name is Derek Amoko, and I am your host. This is our inaugural episode. For those that don't know who I am a licensed real estate broker for the past 11 or so years. I'm also a property manager. And the reason we're starting this podcast is to give our listeners an opportunity to hear from some of the industry's best when it comes to finance, to real estate, and pretty much everything in between. So to start off our brand new podcast, our first guest, a wonderful friend of mine and a wonderful accountant, we've got Jeffery Noun. Jeffrey, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Derek. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yes, you deserve it, and welcome and happy 2021.
Yeah, same to you. Hopefully it's a better year than 2020. I'm sure it's horribly cliche to say that by this point, but nonetheless, hoping it's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. We're all hoping that 2021 is better than 2020. The first 5 days weren't too bad, so let's see where it goes from there. We're obviously doing this podcast remotely due to the pandemic. The topic of our podcast today will be about business and the importance of understanding accounting, essentially. How do you feel so far about 2021? Are you optimistic about it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, after the year we've had, it's hard to think we can go any worse than what we've experienced in 2020 from, every angle, whether that's from a personal life standpoint or from an investment standpoint, although some would argue there was a ton of opportunity in 2020 due to the volatility. But I think what a lot of people are pining for is just a return to stability and normalcy. Obviously, if you're, the risk-loving type, there was a lot of opportunity to take advantage of in 2020, whether that be in the stock market, in real estate. But I think, having stability in the market is definitely a catalyst for investment by the general population, and it's definitely something I think we're all looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I believe that we weren't really ready for what 2020 had to offer us. If anything, we know what 2020 was, and now with 2021, we have an opportunity to at least have a better version of what 2020 was. So, I think there's tons of opportunity, especially in the real estate market, especially on the condo side. I think you can still get some pretty good deals. The single family freehold side of the real estate industry it's booming. It's going incredibly well. But even there, I think there's still lots of wonderful opportunity this year. And it just comes down to, of course, as you said, how much risk you're willing to take. And, that's something that you'd have to look into further, of course, with, the two types of or industry guys like ourselves, an accountant, one, and of course, a real estate broker. Tell me a little bit about your business, Jeff. I've known you a long time, but for our guests here, tell us a little bit about your business.
Yep, sure. So I'm a CPA. I've been licensed for a good number of years now. I started my career off with the Big Four accounting firms. So if people aren't aware of what that is, essentially it's your large public accounting firms where a lot of people go to cut their teeth in the early parts of their career. Eventually moved out of the audit space where I started off there into tax, which is where I specialize now, mainly Canadian corporate tax, and mainly focused on the asset management industry. So certainly very relevant to the investment slant of the podcast here today. So
I know a lot of people get into the real estate business for different reasons. They get into property management for different reasons. Why did you decide to become an accountant? What was it about it that allured you into wanting to get into the industry?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I have to be honest, starting off, it was just a field that made sense to me. In school, I was certainly someone who I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do once I entered the workforce, and accounting just happened to be something I stumbled into in high school and carried out into university and then into a career. It's certainly a challenging profession to be in. And I don't mean that from the standard way everyone would say that. There's definitely a lot of challenges that I didn't expect entering that specific industry. All that said, it's going to be a lot of hard work, but I definitely have learned a lot doing that. It's definitely taught me a lot about, both the technical side of things and also a lot of soft skills that I think are very valuable to anybody in the workforce. So I guess overall what attracted me was, perhaps motives that didn't actually align with what reality was. But in the end, I'm happy to say that, you know, I'm very glad of where I started out and what it's helped me become now in terms of the knowledge I have on things that I normally previously had zero interest in knowing. Things about how best to manage your finances, how the stock market works, how investing works, how unscary it actually is when you understand it, and really how simple it can be once you kind of understand the workings of it all. I was certainly someone early on in my life where I didn't even understand the concept of what interest was, when I was a teenager. Whereas now, all these things are just common sense to me. And, from a financial literacy standpoint, I'm very glad that they are things I've learned. And I think it's things that, hopefully we can talk about a little more on the podcast to spread the knowledge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in our, future podcasts, we'll definitely speak, we'll get more in depth on all of this. But it's interesting because my route to getting into real estate was basically because my father has been a realtor for now almost 35 years. So I'm a second generation realtor. So, I didn't have to do too much heavy thinking or heavy lifting, mental lifting to get to the conclusion that I wanted to be in real estate because I've been around it my entire life. So trying to forge your own path and try to find something you like is, both something that's exciting to do, but, stressful to be able to find.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't come from a line of any accountants. I'm first generation in Canada, and if anything, the hopes and dreams of my parents were riding on me and my sister to make something of ourselves because, they were very blue collar folk, my parents. So, to have a, quote unquote professional job and career is definitely something that my parents aimed for. And, I'll be honest and say that, there was, that pressure to go into a field like that, and maybe accounting wouldn't have been my first choice. But like I said, it's definitely taught me a lot of very important things about how the world works, and especially how investing works.
Yeah, and that's why we bond so well, because we're both first generation Canadians. So we've got parents that weren't born here, and there's a lot of learning to be done.
Absolutely.
When you are first generation Canadian.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best advertisement of what we're trying to do here. It's the fact that anyone can learn this stuff. It doesn't take a genius. As to a certain extent, a lot of it's just common sense, because at the end of the day, this is, the markets, how all this stuff works. It's just human behavior and human motivation. So I think the quicker people understand that, the faster you can absorb how all this stuff works.
No, and that's beautiful the way you put it. We're regular people who didn't have any significant advantages, and we've basically now have an opportunity to, give back the knowledge that we have and do our best to try to, portray and give you the information that you need. And that's a perfect segue. What advice would you give to someone who is now starting out in their preferred industry as a new business owner?
So I would say that, this might sound obvious, but, engross yourself in what you're doing and what you're trying to sell to the public. There's a lot of information out there for free nowadays. The internet's a great thing, as we all know. So, just know what you're doing inside and out. Know your industry, know what the common practices are, know who your competitors are, know what they're doing, and just, be a sponge for information. If I have to lean into my accounting background, obviously, understand your numbers, know where you're doing well, know where you're not. And in my opinion, at least, as an accountant, the only place to be able to see that objectively is to have a good handle on your financial statements, knowing what your numbers look like, and having that done well. Unfortunately, accounting is a place where, there is some mystery to it and maybe isn't the most common sense thing to the average person. So to the extent that isn't your forte, look into hiring a good accountant, someone who you can build some good rapport with and treat them as a business partner, because that's what we are essentially. We're here to help your business succeed, and to the extent that communication is open and clear, the better that relationship will be.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I look back to, when I first started my career in real estate, and the first, 2-3 years, you're still learning and figuring out all the tax implications of, of what you should be writing off, and, how you should be doing your taxes. So it's so important that, before you start, playing the game, essentially, you need to learn the rules. Because if you don't learn the rules, you'll end up, or you could potentially end up in a position where you're paying back, a ton of taxes, or, you just made a mistake that will be very difficult to recover from. So it's so important, to have, an accountant like Jeff, so that, you can bounce ideas, bounce questions, and, try to figure out what's the best game plan or strategy that will work for you, for your business, not just the first year or the second year, but going along throughout, however long you intend to have that business going. Being a sole proprietor, being a corporation, these are all things that you need to consider before opening a business. If it's a real estate business, of course, or if it's anything, any business, doesn't matter what it ends up being. You need to have a strong understanding of the tax implications, and as you said, Jeff, you definitely need to have an accountant, and look at that accountant as a business partner.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess just to riff off that, in a perfect world, obviously, you'd have a professional beside you, an accountant, a lawyer, all the things any business needs in order to help you out with those things. But all too often, as a sole proprietor trying to launch a business, more often than not, you're everyone and everything to that business. You are the salesperson, you're the bookkeeper, you're the tax person, your accounts receivable, your accounts payable, you're everybody. So, I don't want to alienate anybody by saying that, the first step should definitely be go out and pay an accountant. It's sometimes just not feasible to do that. But again, the information is out there. Be a sponge, absorb it. It's not as scary and complicated as people might think it'd be. I'm sure you, Derek, can attest to that, being someone who's gone through the process yourself, having to learn these things. So again, ideal world, having a professional in your back pocket's great. But yeah, otherwise, a lot of good information out there that anyone can learn. Yeah,
and I mean, for our listeners, we have a wealth of knowledge. Jeff's been in his industry for so many years. I've been in my industry for so many years. Of the 11 years that I've been a real estate broker, 4.5 of those years I've owned my own brokerage, my own real estate brokerage. So I had other real estate salespeople and brokers working in my company. So you see so many different tax implications and different ways to go about running your business, that it really is eye-opening, when you get a some sort of a return back, from properly running your business. It just makes a lot of sense. You've seen many different economic climates. What advice would you give to a new business owner on how to weather the financial storm that comes with opening a business in a pandemic?
Yep. So, these are obviously unprecedented times. It's really hard to model how to go about things relative to past crises that we've seen from an economic standpoint. The specifics of this pandemic are very unique to this situation. It's not an overall downturn in any specific area that's caused it. It's the fact that businesses have to shut down overnight. And as we all know, it has a trickle-down effect throughout the whole economy. People lose jobs, they have less money to spend. That impacts other businesses, and all the ships sink on a sinking tide. So, I guess the best advice to possibly give during a time like this is, I would say liquidity obviously is probably the most important thing. To the extent you can stay liquid, maybe not take on that new investment, hoping to be able to capitalize it during this time. Obviously, it's subject to everyone's risk appetite, but generally speaking, to the extent one can stay liquid, the better to weather the storm. And I think that's how most businesses are viewing this pandemic. It is a storm to be weathered. Obviously, depending on what you do, it could be a boon for you right now. If you're in, I don't know, the takeout food sector, if you're in the toilet paper sector, as we all saw early on this pandemic.
Or PPE, right?
PPE, there's a lot of, well, not a lot, but there's a number of industries where, this has been a boon for them and they've been doing quite well. The Ubers of the world are certainly doing much better than the clothing stores of the world right now. But all that said, obviously, I think keep a head above water is probably the most important thing at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's so important to just have a good plan. I mean, it's almost you have to look at the pros and the cons, and you have to look at it with a glass half full sort of look at it, right? Because you're now in the pandemic. You know exactly what to expect, at least from what we've seen from 2020. We're now in 2021, so you can look at that. At least you now have some sort of a playbook, right, to see what happened, and then you can model your business in a way that it can stay afloat. Of course, liquidity is at the very top of that list, but also being able to try to determine and see, try to anticipate what could happen to the business going forward. So these are, all very important. Jeff, how important would you say it is to have a budget in the first?
It's super important.
I saw how excited you were to answer that. Yeah.
I mean, it's table stakes, right? And I mean, that's not even the accountant in me speaking. That's just common sense. If, whether you're a numbers person or not, the numbers matter. And if you don't have a good handle on what's coming in and what's going out, and having a baseline to compare things to, you're essentially flying blind, in my opinion. And I think any business person worth their salt would say that, right? The budget, it's many things at once, right? It's a business plan. It's also something to compare yourself against. So just those two things alone, I think, are extremely important, right? You need to know where you've been and where you're going. And the budget definitely is, not the only tool in that area, but it's certainly a very valuable one. And it keeps you honest, right? I'm sure a lot of business owners out there, they have their hopes and dreams of closing that next big deal and having that windfall fall into their pocket. But, sometimes you just got to model out various scenarios. What if that big contract doesn't come through? What if suddenly one of my suppliers goes out of business and I'm not able to get my hands on what I need to run my business? Things like that. So essentially just having a tool to measure yourself against, it's, like I said, it's table stakes. It's something you just have to do.
Yeah, it's funny because in high school, obviously we differ in this respect, but in high school, I didn't really love math. I looked at math and, it made me feel, a little bit uncomfortable. I was intimidated by it. Fast forward, many years, 10, 15 years. I love math. It's really, I do. It's incredible. So, there'll be younger entrepreneurs who will listen to this podcast and go, hey, I'm not a math person. Trust me. At some point, you're going to start to enjoy math because it's the basis for everything that, it's the basis for how you're going to be able to be successful. Having a firm grasp on the principles of math, the principles of accounting will help take you to the next level for your business. For projections, for budgeting, you really need to have that firm understanding because without it, you're basically, playing Marco Polo, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny how good of a motivator it is when the math depends on, your livelihood, or the other way around, your livelihood depends on the math.
Oh, it's a big motivator. Yeah.
It's a huge motivator, right? And, to your point, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who just did not like math class when they were studying in school, but the math that we're talking about is nothing complex. It's if you can add and subtract, you can make a budget. If anything, the budget's more driven by just common sense. I'd say you just got to know what is realistic. I'd say, and I think it's a good baseline to understand what your expectations should be. And the numbers they should be second nature to you if you're any business owner worth their salt. It should, if someone asks you what your sales were for the last 3 months, that should just that should be automatic. I remember back in the day watching a lot of Shark Tank, a lot of Dragon's Den, and any investor looking for money from those sharks or those dragons who didn't know the numbers inside and out would get torn apart by those guys. And it makes sense. If you don't know your numbers inside and out, then that's a really bad reflection of how well you actually understand your business.
Yeah, and to a certain point as well, it's a reflection of how much you care about your business. Because this at the end of the day, this business is a reflection of you. It should be part of your life, and you should have pride in it. And part of having pride in your business is understanding the finances, understanding your budgets, understanding where you see your business going. And
Absolutely.
if you don't have that that foresight, then you need to go back. You need to have a meeting with yourself. Sometimes that's necessary, and say, hey, these are the things that you got to be honest with yourself. You have to. I've had many business meetings with myself several times where you sit down and you go, okay, well, these numbers are not where they need to be. We need to revisit them. We need to find a new plan on how to meet our goals, and that's necessary. And at the end of the day, that all comes back to your numbers.
Yep.
So we've said that having the right accountant is so important to have prior to starting a new business. Would you agree that a lawyer is up there, if not number one, number two?
Oh yeah, they're certainly up there. I mean, I think most business people starting out is probably the first external professional they reach out to just to get their business papers, documents, incorporation, however you're setting up your business to get that off the ground. And certainly there's certainly overlap between what a lawyer knows and what an accountant knows, but to say that one can do the job of the other would be wrong, just flat out. And it's stuff you need to know. If I were to start a business tomorrow, knowing everything I know from my years doing this whole accounting thing, I would definitely know that I need a lawyer. There's just things they know that I don't. It's like speaking a different language, right? Like, if the whole business world is a bunch of different languages you have to understand, accounting is one side of it. But, having that legal acumen behind you, extremely important.
Yeah, and you've made me think of something else as well. Like, even though it's so important to have, my business, of course, for a client to have a good real estate broker, it's so important to also have a good lawyer, because they go hand in hand. The same way it's good to have a very knowledgeable home inspector, and the list goes on and on. So, yep. I mean, to sort of put this all together in conclusion, you're going to need a lot of different people to assist you with achieving the goals you're looking to achieve. And of course, you should never rely on one individual professional, but at the same time, you need to understand that there's a group, a team, if you will, that you're going to require in order to meet the goals that you're trying to meet.
Yeah, I think, and just while you're saying that, it came to mind. Business owners need to be honest about what their competitive advantage is. And by competitive advantage, it's definitely a very textbook term that I'm throwing out from my old economics classes in university. But essentially, focus on what you're best at doing relative to others, right? If you're the greatest salesman in the world and your business involves selling, item XYZ, then maybe it makes sense for you to spend all your time doing the sales and just hiring out, someone doing the tax filings and having a lawyer look into all those things. Because the best use of your time is doing what you're best at, which is selling. If you're a charismatic person who can sell ice to an Eskimo, as the saying goes, then, that's what you should be spending your time doing, and maybe not wasting your time doing all the routine stuff and hiring that out, once you're able to do that, once you got the cash flow coming in. But, if you're someone who just, can kind of do it all, then maybe it does make sense to have that wider arching understanding and kind of dabbling a little more into the management of the business in addition to just the cash flow generation of the business. Well, hopefully that makes sense.
No, that's beautiful. It makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, as a business owner, you're exactly that. You're the business owner. And so you need to be able to understand what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, as you're saying, just to add to what you said there. You need to, also, understand what you enjoy doing. Because this is, creating a business and owning a business is not an overnight success. It's going to take a lot of time. So it's important that you're doing the things within that business that you enjoy and what your strengths are. So it's so important that if you're not strong at something, to have or to be able to recognize and say, hey, I need, to pass this off to somebody else who can, bring, beneficial, knowledge or information to that part of the business that you simply don't have. So, a big part of being an entrepreneur or a business person is being able to look at yourself, be able to, be critical and say, hey, listen, I need to pass this off to somebody else who can do a better job at this respective thing. And, in being able to recognize and do that, your business will be that much better as you grow it, and in the future as you move forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, in my time spent in my career, I come across a lot of very smart individuals, and you obviously try to pick out what made them successful, and what are the personality traits or the quirks or their ways of thinking that leans towards being successful. And one thing I've noticed is that the people who are able to acknowledge what they don't know faster than others and be able to solve that problem by, whether that be educating themselves or hiring in someone to solve that problem for them, they usually tend to be more successful, even though, success is obviously something measured in many different ways. I'm using it very generally here, but not knowing what you don't know is a great skill to have.
Yeah, not just in business, but in life as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is just general life advice at a certain point. You got to know when it's time to just say, okay, well, I'm probably in over my head here. If I were to keep going forward, I'm probably going to do more damage than good. And, know when to ask for help. And that alone, I think, is just good life instincts, if not business instincts.
And you know what? There's no bad questions. And, I go back to the old saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're probably in the wrong room. Mm-hmm. So you need to be in rooms where you have people who, are not necessarily always smarter than you, but have different, expertise to offer, and vice versa, right? You want to be in a room where it's cohesive, where everyone's learning something,
Yep.
And that's why I hang around people like Jeff. Right? There's always something, and that's why vice versa. And that's why he hangs around with me, because at the end of the day, there's always something to learn, and there's that constant, evolving of everybody, because he knows something that I don't know, and vice versa.
Yep. No, experience is the great teacher. For me, someone who's been doing something for 20 plus years, I'd more readily take their advice over someone who has all the degrees in the world. Nothing trumps life experience, because you've seen, every combination, permutation of things that can happen in any given facet of life. Pertaining specifically to business, someone who's been doing this thing in their entire lifetime, the advice and knowledge and wisdom they can share, it's invaluable. So to the extent that, there is a mentor in your life, someone who, has been through the things that you're going to be going through yourself, foster that relationship, be honest about it, what you're trying to, I don't want to say what you're trying to get out of it, because that sounds a little, selfish and self-motivated, but be honest about the nature of the relationship, right? I mean, this person can be your friend and everything, but, as a mentor, be upfront about, I'm looking to get advice from you on this, and hopefully they're willing to share that.
Absolutely. Honesty in everything you do is the best policy, right? It's so important.
Yep.
With that being said, Jeff, I appreciate the time. I appreciate that we've had such a wonderful discussion. We're going to do this again. In the future, we'll go more in depth on specific business ideas and business or accounting principles as well, so we can give our listeners, that much more, quality information for them, so they can use it in their, day-to-day business and their day-to-day lives. So, with that being said, I'm wishing you a very happy 2021, and hoping and wishing you nothing but the best going forward. And until we come back again, we thank you so much for listening to The Poised Investor. Bye for now.
All right. Bye. Take care. Thanks for having me on, Derek. I appreciate it. And same to you as well.
Thank you.